Mammon is the story of money and the worldwide Church of God based in Pasadena, California. It is a tale of backbiting and power struggle, of fat expense accounts and disinheritance in a church whose 100,000 members each year contribute $80 million. And that is more money than is collected by Billy Graham and Oral Roberts combined. It is the story of Herbert W. Armstrong, founder of the Worldwide Church of God, of his son Garner Ted, once thought of as heir apparent, who has now been cast out of the church by his father, and of an unlikely church figure, an accountant, lawyer, and businessman, chief advisor to Herbert Armstrong, Stanley Rader. Finally, it is the story of how the state of California is now trying to hold the Worldwide Church of God accountable for all the tax-exempt money that pours into its Pasadena headquarters. The California Attorney General wants the church to open its books so they can find out if Herbert Armstrong and Stanley Rader have been siphoning off church money for their personal use. That is a charge that incenses Herbert W. Armstrong.
If the state and the judicial system should succeed in this present action, there will be, in actual fact, no separation of church and state left in the United States of America.
Stanley Rader is equally incensed. It is, says Rader, as though the state of California were to question the integrity of Jesus Christ himself.
Do you believe him to be an apostle of Jesus Christ?
No question in my mind. He is the most amazing human being that God has ever placed on this earth in 2,000 years. No question.
In other words, he is the equivalent of the men who sat with Jesus Christ at the Last Supper.
In my opinion, yes.
But Herbert Armstrong's son, Garner Ted, is not so sure.
I certainly do believe that my father is a minister of Jesus Christ, but I don't believe that he is the one and only apostle, no.
Since being cast out by his father, Garner Ted has left Pasadena for his own church in Tyler, Texas, whence he now preaches the gospel over the radio. Garner Ted has misgivings, he says, about the fiscal practices of his father's Worldwide Church of God.
Is there a money scandal of major proportions brewing somewhere under the surface?
It depends on how much is brought to light by the current investigation. My own personal apprehensions are that there is
a scandal, not just spending in the wrong places by the wrong people. It's in effect stealing.
I better reserve comment on that. I'm just going to have to wait and see what the legal processes discover in it.
Well, 60 Minutes set out to find out what it could about the finances of the Worldwide Church of God. We couldn't talk to Herbert W. Armstrong. Stanley Rader wouldn't let us. Nor will he let the state of California look at the church's books. The matter is pending now in the California courts. But Mr. Rader did consent to talk to us, told us he would answer any question that we cared to ask. And first off, he took us on a tour of the church headquarters in Pasadena.
That auditorium you couldn't reproduce today for $40 million.
These buildings are testimony to the faith and the money the 100,000 followers of Herbert Armstrong have invested in him over the years. Here on 40 green acres sits the spiritual and administrative home of his church. Here, too, is his Ambassador College that he established nearly 30 years ago to train his followers for the work, as he calls it.
How much is this whole complex, all of the land, all of the buildings, the entire installation, worth?
Well, I would say conservatively somewhere between $120 and $150 million.
All that wealth is administered from this executive suite in Pasadena. This is where Stanley Rader controls the purse strings, for he is treasurer of the church. His office would be the envy of any corporate executive. His job puts a multi-million-dollar jet plane at his disposal to fly him anywhere in the world. And on the ground, he is provided with a limousine and chauffeur. The church bought and maintains for him this home in Tucson, Arizona. His other home, near his office in Pasadena, California, is filled with expensive works of art. And he's not at all loath to talk about his salary, which is some $200,000 a year.
$200,000 plus. Plus my entire employee benefit package will bring me closer to $300,000.
And his contract runs to the year 2003. Where do all these tens of millions of dollars come from? They come in response to Herbert Armstrong's interpretation of the Bible, in which Moses says that God commands man to tithe his crop and his herd to the Lord. Thus, Herbert Armstrong insists, tithe, that is, give 1/10 of his gross income to the church every year. But the giving doesn't stop with the first tithe. There is a second tithe, too. And every third year, an extra third tithe. Not to mention Mr. Armstrong's pleas to church members for special offerings several times a year. A loyal church member can wind up donating as much as 1/3 of his gross income to the Worldwide Church of God. And no steward of God's money within the Worldwide Church of God wields more power than Stanley Rader. Since his modest beginning back in 1957 as the church's accountant, he has managed to climb to the top of the financial ladder of the church. And along the way, he has at times had a financial interest in private firms doing business with the church.
Do you know how much our expenses in the Worldwide Church of God were during 1978?
I probably incurred expenses for the church probably in the neighborhood of $250,000 or more.
Rader spends that money, he says, to spread the gospel. And a far more lavish expense account was authorized by Rader for a Japanese gentleman who served as advance man for Armstrong and Rader in their worldwide search for converts.
Who is Professor Osamu Goto?
Goto. G-O-T-O-H.
Who is he?
Acronym for Go to Heaven.
In a period of about 3 months in 1975, there's an expenditure of $107,000, all but $12,000 of it, by Goto. This is a church organization.
Yes, Mike, absolutely. He spent on Mr. Armstrong's behalf probably around $750,000 a year on the average.
To do what?
To spread the gospel of Jesus Christ.
The only way Goto ever spread the word is because some of those dollars say, "In God we trust." He was spending upwards of $813,000 in 1 year to give away everything from worldwide trips to Japanese senators, which to me is like a miniature Korea Gate.
How many converts did your father see?
0 that I know of in Japan.
No, Mike, our policy was we would make friends wherever we went in order to help us to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ. Mike, if you had a man like Goto, you'd be twice as effective as you are today.
We noticed an $8,000 expense item listed to a Dr. Singh.
Why would Goto pay for Dr. Singh $8,000 TWA, a trip Amsterdam-Tokyo, Amsterdam?
Because he went from Amsterdam to Tokyo to appear on Mr. Armstrong's behalf. He went with his wife back and forth, 2 round-trip tickets, first class. He's a member of the International Court of Justice at The Hague.
Do you know something, Mr. Rader? Dr. Singh told us he was too busy. He couldn't make that trip to Tokyo. Never appeared.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that's what he would say.
You mean he was there?
Yes, he was.
So he lied to us?
Yes.
And there were also expenses for gifts that Mr. Armstrong himself carried to foreign dignitaries.
Steuben glass, 6 crystal pillar griffins, $12,000. Gifts.
Did you know, Mike, that Dwight Eisenhower was president of the United States for 8 years, and every time he visited a head of state, he gave a piece of Steuben? Did you know that?
Are you saying?
You know,
are you suggesting that Herbert Armstrong is a head of state?
Exactly.
Oh.
Exactly.
And you're the Secretary of State.
You got it. By God, you've got it, Mike. That's it. That's the whole key. This is a state, and we are representatives of God, and I am Mr. Armstrong's Secretary of State.
But in truth, he is closer to being Secretary of the Treasury, administrator of a tax-exempt charitable trust. And it was the way he has handled church funds that has prompted some members, dissidents of the church, Rader calls them, to seek out California's Special Deputy Attorney General, Hillel Chodos.
They had become concerned, especially in recent months, that church funds were being misused by Mr. Rader, particularly, perhaps Mr. Armstrong. And they had obtained some evidence of that misuse.
The Attorney General says the state of California not just has the right, but it has the duty to protect the assets of a charitable trust.
He says much more than that, Mike, and I promised the congregation of this church that I'm going to make him eat every one of the words. He has said the property of the church belongs to the state. He has said the church belongs to the state. He has said the church has no rights, the brethren have no rights, the church doesn't even have a right to defend itself. And I promise you, Mike, I promise your audience, he's going to eat every word. Every one of them.
It was not only Stanley Rader and Herbert Armstrong and Professor Goto who spent the church's money extravagantly. Garner Ted admits that he did too before he was cast out.
It's awfully hard for me to avoid being painted with the same brush, and I do have a certain degree of culpability in the past because, after all, I was part of it.
You were open enough with Garner Ted Armstrong to offer him what was, in effect, a $50,000 a year contract of what seems, on the face of it, to be hush money.
No, no.
If he would agree never to release, divulge, disclose, make available, or in any other manner make known any such information or documentation in perpetuity which you have within your knowledge, possession, custody, or control,
Exactly.
etc., etc.
Exactly.
Sounds like $50,000 a year worth of hush money.
Well, you can call it hush money if you want to. I said to keep his bad mouth shut.
I knew the amounts of money going for the overseas trips. I knew the kind of money Godo was spending. I knew the kind of money that Rader was spending. I knew about his Beverly Hills home. I knew about the leasing corporation, Gateway Publishing, Worldwide Advertising, on and on and on it went. And practically everywhere you look, if the church has business that is performing or bills that it's paying, well, somewhere Rader is involved. How can this be? Why should it be?
And Attorney Chodos would like answers, too. For several months, he's been trying to get a close-up look at the church's financial records. But Stanley Rader, also an attorney, has resisted by every legal means. He claims that what the state of California is trying to do violates constitutional guarantees of freedom of religion.
Herbert Armstrong, in effect, has the right to do with the church what he wants.
You bet your life. You bet your life, because he is responsible and accountable to God.
As far as you're concerned, there's no constitutional issue involved here, separation church and state.
No, let me explain what I'm talking about. I think people have a constitutional right to be stupid if they want to. They have a right to be generous if they want to. And they have a right to give money to Herbert Armstrong to light cigars with, if that's what they want to do. And nobody would interfere with them except for the fact that they have elected to do it with a substantial tax subsidy from the rest of the public on the premise that they are a lawful, charitable corporation and trust.
Stanley Rader was not a church member until 1975 when Herbert Armstrong baptized him in a hotel bathtub in Hong Kong. And what worries some church members is that Rader sees himself as heir apparent to the leadership of the church. Herbert Armstrong has privately voiced those same concerns.
Just a little while ago, you were the bête noire of Herbert Armstrong. Did you know that?
I?
Yes.
When was this?
Oh, early January.
No.
Don't believe it?
Positive.
Let me quote Herbert Armstrong.
This is from Mr. Armstrong to whom?
Herbert Armstrong.
To whom?
I can't
You're sure that's Mr. Armstrong's letter?
He was talking about your attempt to step into the leader's shoes. He said he's deliberately trying to put himself there. I don't want to think that anyone has their eyes on $50, $60, $70 million a year, but that is quite a magnet.
You really think Mr. Armstrong said that to somebody?
You don't?
I don't think so.
Next, we read a portion of a letter Herbert Armstrong told our source that he was drafting to send to Stanley Rader.
I have to say candidly, Stan, for we have to face the facts, that very near unanimously, neither the ministry nor the lay members of the church will accept you as their spiritual leader.
Now, you're saying that you have that in a letter from Mr. Armstrong?
You don't believe it?
Positive.
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 Can we play you his voice saying those things and see what you think?
Yes, of course.
He is deliberately trying to put himself there. I don't know. I don't want to think that anyone has their eyes on $50, $60, $70 million a year. That is quite a magnet, you know.
The tape we played was a portion of 2 telephone conversations with Herbert Armstrong, which our source had recorded surreptitiously prior to 60 Minutes beginning its investigation. In this second excerpt, played for Mr. Rader, Herbert Armstrong is reading to our source that letter he's about to send to Stanley Rader, asking Rader to step down from any church posts he holds that might put him in line as successor to Armstrong, but inviting him to stay on as Armstrong's personal advisor.
I have just written Stan a letter. I have to say candidly, Stan, for we have to face the facts as they exist, that very near unanimously, neither the ministry nor the lay members of the church will accept you as their spiritual leader.
Now, I say you have acquired this by illegal means. I intend to have my attorneys today not only sue you if you use this, but I mean this, Alan. I want you to go to the district attorney today that tape is not a complete tape. There was a 7-page letter. I'll go to any court in any land and prove to you that the tape is not a complete record. I've already made the letter public to the entirety of the church. It's been printed. Mike, look, I think you better scrap everything because you're on my list, okay? You're never going to live it down, Mike, I guarantee it. I'll use it as a springboard to show just what the press is because you're contemptible. I mean, it's not for the family. I'd like you to get out of here immediately. I hope you got it, and I hope you have the guts to use it.
As we said, Herbert Armstrong did write to Stanley Rader asking him to step down. And Mr. Rader did publish that communication in a church newsletter. But several weeks later, apparently Mr. Armstrong had a change of heart about Rader because he defended him passionately before a meeting of the ministers.
You just don't like him, but I do. And I'm going to keep the man that God gives me if I want him, and nobody is going to say nay to me.
As we said earlier, we tried to interview Mr. Armstrong, but Mr. Rader would not permit it. Why did Herbert Armstrong apparently change his mind and defend Stanley Rader? Well, another portion of the tape we played for Mr. Rader might offer a clue.
Well, I don't know whether Stan will just go along or whether he's just going to rant and rave and just throw everything overboard. He had made one statement about telling the world what he knows. Now, I don't know what he thinks he knows that could harm the work. Frankly, I don't know of anything that he knows that could do it.
For years, these deep-seated jealousies and resentments were just there. Now, boom, they've all exploded, they've erupted like Vesuvius, and they're out in the open. So I'm saying that at least some of the people on the top are being a little bit honest for a change.
Do you know what you're describing?
Yes, human nature.
You're also describing a big corporation where everybody's fighting for advantage.
Just like any
for salaries, for
Sure.
perks, for ambition, for power. What in the world is churchly about all that?
Good question. Not one thing.
It seems to me, Mr. Armstrong, that your father and you and Stanley Rader conceivably are giving religion a bad name.
I think that's a good point. I think that over the last few years, the Worldwide Church of God, because of its incredible internal difficulties, has tended to give a bad name to religion. I think it's a tragedy.
A footnote. We have learned that Stanley Rader is currently under investigation by the Criminal Investigation Division of Internal Revenue for alleged tax evasion.